Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Seven Eighths, a podcast to share stories on failures and rejections. There are no fairy tale endings in this podcast. My fellow conversationalists aren't past the mountain of struggle. In fact, some of them might still be in it. I hope this podcast serves as a forum for friends and acquaintances to exchange tales of defeat. Defeats that make the 7/8 part of our lives, like the part of the iceberg you can't see. By sharing these stories, I hope we can all normalize failures and thereby win over that fear of defeat. Because failing is just a part of living. I hope you will listen and relate. Do leave me a note of feedback and critique. I am on Twitter at FarmNectar. Now to our episode. Welcome to the pilot episode of The 7/8ths. In this episode, I'm talking to a dear friend, Anusha. Anusha has a successful career in tech, but beneath the veneer, there are setbacks. I explored her struggles and learned her perspective in this episode. I'm taking you into our conversation. Just listen in. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of this little podcast trial that we're doing. Like I'd mentioned, my motivation was to talk about failures and struggles and rejections, just to make it a norm. I feel all of us go through deal with rejections, etc., but we just don't share it as widely. And society also has a thing about talking about your failures, and somehow in the loud claps that come associated with success, the topic of, hey, I failed 300 times to actually get here gets lost. Having said that, I just wanted to hear from you as to what is your earliest recollection of your failure, and sort of talk through how you experienced it, how you processed it, and did you even come to terms with it?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this pretty deep conversation. Like I said, we don't talk enough about failures, and this is definitely a great experiment. I think failures and rejections are just part of life, and almost everyone that's born faces failures, and honestly, failure is inevitable. And I remember when you actually proposed this topic about rejections and failures, the first thing that came to my mind is this amazing Harvard commencement speech back in 2008 by J.K. Rowling on fringe benefits of failure. I'd highly recommend people to listen to it. It's a very fun and thought-provoking talk on failures. And I'd like to start this conversation by quoting something from that talk as we begin this. And she says, you might never fail on the scale that I did, but some failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live life so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default.
Yeah. What's interesting about what you just quoted and shared was, by trying to avoid failure, you are failing.
Precisely. Yeah. In fact, try.
And that's actually, that is very counterintuitive. But that is true, right?
Yeah. Of course, not all failures are the same. So the people in general are hesitant to try something or fail at something if they don't have a fallback plan, or if they don't have a safe place to fail, like at work. Let me
challenge you there, right? So I agree with you that people, in some instances, right, people fail if there is a safe option. Let's just turn that around a little bit and talk about a failure where today, 5 years later, 3 days later, whatever be it, right? It doesn't seem like this. It was earth shattering. But when I went through it, I thought the stakes were really high, and I failed. struggled. I didn't get to what I wanted to get to. Is there any experience like that that you can share? And walk me through sort of how did you handle your emotions when you went through it?
Sure. So, I mean, there are several failures that are life-changing failures that I've gone through. But one thing that I do vividly remember is I was going through a huge personal crisis, and running was my sort of freedom to break away from it, and sort of um, clear my head, and sort of have some goal in life, and sort of have a purpose sort of to go. So I used to actually run half marathons and full marathons. So that kept me going really, really well, like, keep my sanity, and then go keep going. And I did that for almost 2 years. And unfortunately, I ended up with a very bad damage to my disc, my lower back disc
Oh,
during
wow.
a
Okay.
race.
Oh, ouch.
So,
Okay.
what
Ouch.
happened after that was just physically and emotionally painful. The fact that I actually couldn't sit up straight or walk without pain for close to a year. I couldn't
Oh my God.
I couldn't cook. I couldn't. I had some pretty bad complications with nerve damage and stuff. So it took me about 3 to 4 years to actually live without pain and manage my pain. I thankfully I didn't have to go through surgery and stuff. But that was something that was very that shattered. That was very shattering for me, given that I was already going through something, and this was my sort of escape away from what I was going through. And it was pretty, I didn't feel like a failure, I would say, but it was a lot of setbacks. At the same time.
Oh, yes. So I'll say this, Anusha. I know you since
Yeah.
2007, like 13 years now. I did not know that you went through such uh especially if you like running, like I like running, so I
I
can
don't
truly
run
relate to it.
run crazy like you, but I used to love running. Yeah, yeah,
No, no, I understand. I can totally relate to that
yeah,
emotion. And if you were to take
yeah,
away running, I can't
yeah.
imagine. So,
And the
um,
thing is, it was not I didn't think of it as a failure. I was like, hey, this can happen to anybody. It was just a freak accident. And, I never blame myself for any of that. But that did not sort of help with, okay, now what do I do?
yes,
Now what do I
yeah,
do? Other than, hey,
yeah,
okay, so now but then it was, how did I overcome that feeling of, hey, here was that one thing that was actually very comforting to me, and now I failed at that too. So what do I do, right? I think you have to pick yourself up, and you just don't pick yourself up without help, right? For me, just having a good support system helped a lot. So did I know that, okay, if I physically hurt myself, I had a fallback plan? I didn't think about it that way, but I thankfully I had a fallback plan, which was having the support system that I actually had. So I dug into it, and sort of did other things, and eventually came back stronger. It took a long time, but it was a pretty intense period where walking and driving and cooking was hard. Like, those were my everyday challenges.
yeah. And I can't, to be honest, like I can't even imagine how difficult it would have been. Like even having that attitude that you had, which is, hey, it is a freak accident. Um, when everyday
Yeah,
chores, uh, something, as simple as just getting up and picking up the
yeah,
TV remote for all you
yeah,
care, right? Becomes a Herculean task. When something as simple as that, even you need to turn to someone to help you. Um, it's an enormous toll, both physically and
yeah,
mentally,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, and simply just kudos to you. I'm curious to understand how you approached, you know, leaning in on that support
Yeah.
system. How did you even go about, you know, getting this support network in place? Because one of the things that a lot of us struggle with is just being vulnerable, right? Um, Interestingly, though, um, I think there was a podcast. I listened to
Yeah.
Adam Grant. He runs his podcast for Work Life. Yeah. So he ran one about team and team building and bonding and vulnerability. And one of the interesting things that he said to me was teams think that they can be vulnerable once they have a bond, but it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Being vulnerable is sort of the first
Yeah.
step into forming that bond. So if you can share some of, your what did you do during that? It was a difficult place
Sure.
for you
Yeah.
to have been. What are some of the things that you did that helped you form that bond, right?
Yeah, sure. Interestingly, it was also a time where I was actually pretty new to California. I barely had friends or family, or my work was pretty new. But I've always been this child, even from childhood. It might be just a personality thing. I never I was very, I had my own personality. I was always very individualistic. I would never do things just because someone else did something. It had to speak to me.
Yeah,
Something has to,
yeah, I still feel
it
that.
has to
Yep, yep,
appeal
I
to
can
me.
vouch for it.
Uh,
You're still that way.
I've always been that person. So I never, and I'm also um, pretty clear in my head as far as what if I mess up, I am very open about apologizing, and also very self-aware. I think being self-aware helps. If so my What I'm trying to say is, I never thought of this as a failure on my part. I And it was easy for me to just say, hey, yeah, this was a freak accident. It can happen to anybody, I guess. Maybe I didn't train well, but hey, I'm not going to go and kill myself on thinking about what could have, should have. And my mom, it comes from my mom too. She says, you can never change history. Yeah, you just accept it and then move on. So for me, moving on was not the problem. For me, moving on was, well, it was more like, hey, there is this physical disability that I actually have. So what am I going to do? So and you talked about vulnerability again. For me, my husband says this. He says that it's so easy for me to actually be vulnerable more than anybody has actually seen. And it's not like there's a difference between vulnerability and just being open to about anything and everything. I think vulnerability is to be able to just take the first step and say, hey, don't worry about it, we've gone through shit together, right? So um again, I don't think I worry about being judged. So I guess that is why I am able to be vulnerable.
Wow, wow, that's a tip right there. That's a tip
Yeah.
right there.
I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't care about what others think about me. It's not that I'm indifferent to how people think about me, but it's also that uh, at the end of the day, it's how comfortable I feel about taking certain decisions and speaking about them. And I've always, I don't worry about taking an unpopular opinion. Honestly, if it feels right to me, I take that unpopular opinion. It's okay. uh,
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
definitely a personality thing, but also the fact that I had very good support from my parents, from my brother, who used to not be in the same. He never. Right now he lives in California, but he used to live in Texas before, and I ended up having a lot of good friends eventually through in this process. I remember one of my good friends that she became one of my good friends later on, but she actually ended up teaching me swimming to help me with the recovery. I didn't know swimming, so
Hmm.
one of the recovery things was, hey, try to swim instead of run, and that might help you. So she actually ended up teaching me. So you just find these things that are organic and that feel authentic to you, and eventually you grow your support system, I guess. At least that's sort of worked for me.
Yeah. Um, Talk to me about, the other facet of life, which is a big part of all of our living, right? Um, Talk to me about some of the failures that you ran into
At
at work.
Yeah, a
Um,
lot.
yeah, and all of us have those
Yeah.
stories, girl. Um, and how did you, and then there's two kinds here, right? Like one, um, you just fail because you you did something stupid. Um, how did you process it, and how do you recover from something at work? You know, woman engineer, leadership positions, etc. You would have seen your share of tricky fun, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about what were some of the struggles that you run into, you ran into, you still continue to run into, and what are you doing to sort of keep your head above water?
Yeah, there are a lot. I would say just setbacks. I think failure is a very loaded term, and it's also very, very, it sounds very catastrophic. I think I think of rejections or anything that doesn't go according to plan as a setback, rather than a huge failure. Also, it's a very subjective thing. What you set out to be, and it's not necessarily a permanent state, right? It could be a very transient state. It's a setback for now. If you truly believe in reaching whatever that target is, uh, again, whether it's a friendship you want to nurture, whether it's being a better parent, whether you being a more understanding spouse, being a better coworker, being a better engineer, whatever it is, it could just be a transient state. The setback could just be a transient state, and eventually, if your heart is in it, you will put your mind through it, and then get going, right? um
I, I like that. I like how you framed it as, um, it's a transient state. Um, I
yeah,
think uh, many of us, even with our conversations, etc., what I've noticed is many of us do tend to hook on to failures as an absolute.
yeah.
Um, it's almost like, hey, it's a rubber stamp and it's never going away,
Yeah. I mean,
and
some of
then
those can
stamped as a
be,
failure.
but even if you take like standardized tests like SATs and ACTs or even interviews, right? They always give you another. There's like, for example, like I think you can apply to Google like a maximum of 5 times in your lifetime or something like that. And then they encourage you to keep applying if you fail the interview, right? Like that shows that it's transient in nature, that it's just that, hey, the conditions for your application were not conducive at this time, but again, try again in a year, right? Like that's or even a standardized testing, right? Like something like a GMAT or a GRE, you can actually take at least like 3 or 4 times before,
Hmm.
hey, um, you know you, too bad. But in general, I think, I mean, there are some very irreversible failures, and mostly the one things that the few things that I can think of are just mostly health related. Your health fails, uh, a lot of times it is irreversible. If somebody has a terminal illness, it's something that is irreversible. uh, but other than that, I can't think of anything that is a very permanent state. uh,
Yeah,
y-
and that's
y-
a great reminder actually to
yeah,
all of us that, you know, whatever we consider as failure, unless it's what you just called out, right? I mean, it's a health, something that is outside of our hands. I mean, take even the COVID-19 situation that we're all
yeah,
going through.
yeah,
That, other than that, I think most of the failures or setbacks
yeah,
are Transient.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
I like that.
definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so at work, I have so I've gone through ups and downs at work a lot. I have been in companies and in teams where I have gotten so much support. Um, and I have been in companies and teams where I have gotten no support. I've
Let's talk
had,
about the latter. There's a
yeah,
lot of passion there that I hear.
yeah. Oh God, yeah. I used to work at a very big tech company. That prided itself of very good engineering, and uh, like any huge company, there was no one uniform culture as far as engineering goes. And so towards the sort of later part of my career in that company, I wanted to work in this one specific, so I actually consciously moved to that team. And they had no women in there, and they were the engineers in that team were pretty senior, and they had this very elitist attitude towards themselves, and they all went to, like, they had PhDs from Ivy Leagues, and so there was this very elitist attitude about everything, and they had a chip on their shoulder, like they had too much attitude about it. The engineering was actually good quality, yes, but there was a lot of arrogance in how they would approach approach anything, including how they sort of assimilated me into the team. And
Mhm.
there were times where I was miserable, and um, I mean, I come with a lot of experience too, but I did not have the pedigree that they had. And
Mhm.
they were quick to sort of bucket me into a, hey, she's not from Brown, she's not from Stanford, she's not from MIT, and
Mhm.
she hasn't worked in our team before, and so she has to I literally had to fight my way to earn my credibility in that team. And that was very, very tough. I would I say that it's a failure? I'm glad that I tried it out to know that there can be such hostile environments, um,
Yeah.
so that I can actually appreciate the much nicer teams that I worked on with later. I don't take those
Mhm.
for granted anymore. But
Yeah.
it was a very miserable time. The good thing, what did I learn from it? The good thing is these guys were really, really smart, so I did learn a lot of like hardcore engineering from them. But I left the team and the company about a year, 2.5 years after I joined the team. And I remember in my exit interview, the manager of the team was like, you worked with some of the really difficult guys and you still came out pretty good, and it's just very hard to work with them. And I was like, I don't know if to take that as a compliment or not, because you should be fixing shit like this. But
Yeah.
but those were difficult things. And how did I sort of overcome it? I would basically vent it all out to my husband. And there were times where I was like very, very, very close to quitting, and he would be like, "Hey, just hang in there, just believe in the process and just focus on what you're trying to get out of this experience." It was very hard, though,
Mhm.
honestly. But after a while, I just mentally tuned out of 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 the toxicity, and just focused only on what it is that I gain out of it. Um, I wouldn't recommend anybody to continue working in toxic environments. But if you have a plan, for me, the plan was to actually complete a project that I was working on, so it would look good on my resume. Because at that point, I had sort of almost given up on, hey, right now I don't care too much about the team, too much about the company. Now it's just all for me. So it's again not a thing that I would recommend to anybody, but for me, it was that. And I was able to just focus only on that, and have like clear milestones and get out of that place. um,
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely relate
yeah.
to it. I mean, the way I'm seeing this, and I have a similar experience in my life as well. To me, I didn't. It wasn't necessarily a feeling of failure, but it was more a feeling of rejection. Um, the way I was looking at that situation was they are
Yeah.
rejecting me, from that
Yeah.
clique, from that group
Yeah.
that they had. I'm not in the know. I'm not in the circle. I'm not
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Um, and that made every day going into the office just ridiculously hard.
Yeah.
Um, and I really struggled through the years that I was in that role. In fact, it was so bad that it actually started affecting how good I was at my
Mm.
job, even. Just because after a certain point, I
Yeah,
stopped
yeah,
caring.
that's what happens.
Um,
That's I think you become indifferent to the team, to the company. You basically just care about yourself because you're now in survival mode, right? Like you're like, okay, fine, let me see what I need to get out. I need to get out of this,
yeah,
and then I'm gonna get out. I want to survive.
and and you know what? It's actually nice to hear that from you as well. Not that I'm wishing for everybody sort of go through this experience, but it's nice to hear that it
Oh yeah, it
happens.
happens all the time. So the exclusivity that like you get excluded, that happens more so for women because for women in tech, because it's kind of well,
I haven't thought of it that way, but you might be right there. Like if I reflect back, I'm like, wait, that's literally what's happening right now. You are right.
yeah,
Yep.
more so, yeah, because we don't do their happy hours or don't go skiing with them over weekends and meet their families as much. I mean, yeah. Uh, it's a hard place, but then that's why there is a lot of encouragement on finding other female colleagues and then bonding with them, and then just doing that. But I don't know, I have very mixed feelings about this equality in tech because it's very hard. It's very, very hard. I've been working for almost
Yeah.
19 years now, and I see no equality. I see no equality.
No, I'm glad, and I would
Yeah,
agree with you. I would agree with you for a variety of reasons. And I align with you in the perspective that it is
yeah,
really hard. Even as a
yeah,
manager, it is really, really hard because you can't set out and say, I'm going to hire a female engineer for this
yeah,
role. That's not how you can set out. What is funny is when I was talking to the recruiters that helped me, in at the intake itself, I don't see
yeah,
enough resumes, and it boggles
yeah,
my mind. Like, there's a part of me that thinks such experiences, right? Like, hey, I was rejected from being a part of that clique. Frankly, if I were to go through that same kind of experience for another 6 years, 8 years, there would be at one point where I'd be like, I don't want to be a part of any
yeah,
clique. I'm out,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I'm out. I don't care for this
yeah,
anymore. There's a part of me that wonders, how many women that are out there that have taken
yeah.
that route. All of a
Oh,
sudden,
totally.
like especially
Yeah,
once you
yeah,
have a
yeah, totally.
family,
It's yeah.
once you have a family, it's game
Yeah, it's like
changing.
how many battles are you going to fight? So you start picking your
Exactly.
battles, and you're like, okay. And in my case, this was I was reporting to a director who had 45 people reporting to him. All right, and I was
Oh
a woman,
wow.
and he basically didn't have any time or resource to basically fix anything, and and
Yeah.
and so what is so the system is so messed up anyway in so many levels that like women empowerment is like one dot in like the thousand things that need to be changed. And but the point is it affects technically 50% of the workforce. So um it's hard. It's a very difficult situation. I don't know if I go back in time, what would I have done differently? I might have spoken up maybe more, and but then I still don't think that would have made any difference. It
Yeah. And I agree with you. Like I agree with you because I believe the same for my
yeah.
experience as well. Um, Philosophically, we can always say, theoretically, we can hypothesize and say, yeah, we could have spoken up and maybe it would have made a difference. But, if you look at the data, hey, if I have a manager that's overseeing a team of 300 people,
Yeah.
chances are, my issue that affects, at the numbers
Yeah.
game, that affects 2% of the
Yeah.
team,
Right.
5% of the team, am I really, if I were him, would I really spend cycles
Exactly.
in trying to resolve this issue for 3% of the group?
Yeah.
Probably not. Maybe I just don't have the bandwidth at the time. But more importantly, like I said earlier, it's interesting to see that such experiences happen. It's not just me that's
Yeah.
going through it. Um, it happens, and it's sort of
Yeah, and
common.
I think it's
Um,
at an individual level, you as a woman has to rise up and then just go. You cannot as a woman working in tech in Bay Area. I think that you have to fend for yourself. There is no work support system that will help you through things. So you have to basically spot the right opportunities and then just go for it. And if you get support at work, great, but don't expect it. At least that's what's worked for me. Because
that's good to
because
know.
they have a lot of HR policies, they have a lot of talk about it, but I have honestly not seen anything work. Most of it is just propaganda, most of it is just brand building for the company. Very few companies
That's interesting. Yeah,
actually.
yeah. I mean, thank you for being that candid. Like it's it's really good to know just the fact that you said, hey, it's in your hands. You gotta fend for yourself, and if possible, find that women group, that support group that you mentioned um, earlier, and build that network for yourself. But it's in your hands.
Basically, if you find something, great for you, but don't wait for it, or rather don't uh, completely rely on it for
Expect it.
helping you out, because there is no such thing. So you just have to work doubly as hard or doubly as smart and figure it out. It's a very unfair game, but that is how it is.
I like that. It's a very unfair game, but that is
Yeah.
reality. Yeah. Some of the things that you said that is going to stick with me was, that support network. Um, Failure is transient. Setbacks are transient, unless, of course, it's health and it's a bit subjective. But most of the things that majority of us tend to think of as failures, as setbacks. Oh, that house that I wanted to get, I didn't get it. The love life that I wanted to have, I don't have it. The things that I wanted to get in the job, I don't have it. It's transient, and I think that's deep. That really helps in picking up and moving on. And then the third thing that you said, which was interesting for me, was this is life, right? It's reality, and especially as women in tech and in the Bay Area, women in tech in general, I would think, don't go in expecting
Yeah.
a support system. You sort of have to fend for yourself. So thank you for being so candid. This
Thank
has been
you.
great. And that's how the cookie crumbles. Thanks to Anusha, I understand that failure is a transient state, that it's okay to be vulnerable and lean on support. And guess what? Life isn't fair, and that is reality. Until next episode. Cheers, guys.